Hello everyone, welcome back to the Retrospective. As you know, this is an engineering leadership podcast where we give advices and share our experience on engineering management and engineering leadership topics. With me here is our regular host Jeremy, and I'm Peter, the co-host. And for new listeners, we have a format where we are focusing every episode on one single topic targeted at engineering managers and technical leaders who are interested in generic leadership topics. This time it was on Jeremy, on you, to bring a topic. So I'm curious, what did you bring to us?
Yeah, it's great to be here with you, Peter. The topic I wanted to talk about is something near and dear to my heart, which relates to delivery. You know, delivery is one of the key things that engineering managers are responsible for. And the topic I wanted to talk about was really focusing on time boxing and using time boxing as your main method to manage delivery.
Awesome. What is time boxing?
Well, it's not time blocking. Fundamentally, time boxing is a principle that you then apply. The principle of time boxing basically is that you block a period of time to do a task or a project, and you stick to that time frame. You basically, in a project, normally you have scope, what you're going to do, and you have the timeline, and you have maybe the people as well. And so what you actually do is you fix the number of people, ideally. You fix the time, but you allow the scope to change in time boxing. Whereas in traditional project management, you're actually usually having variable scope, because as you build, you do more. And you may also try and add more people or do other things. So time boxing is really trying to limit and then still deliver something. And the principle of time boxing is really well known to most people, because when people say they're working in Agile, and they're often using sprints, 1 week sprints, 2 week sprints, whatever. And time boxing is a fundamental principle of sprints.
So this is basically like Scrum sprints rebranded in a different way?
The important thing is to understand that this is the principle behind sprints. And then to understand the power of that. And then all I'm saying is, when you're doing projects, I would suggest that you apply this principle to your projects as well. Even if you're using sprints as part of your delivery, or you could be using Kanban or whatever, the idea that I'm proposing is that you apply time boxing to the bigger level projects and not just to your sprint or whatever that you're already doing.
Okay. Maybe we can get into a little bit deeper about the problems this is solving. Like, how do you diagnose traditional project management and how time boxing is solving those problems, or what are the problems it's solving?
Yeah. So I think what I see a lot of companies doing, and a lot of places I've worked in, is some element of what's been called water, scrum, fall. So kind of like high level planning process and project planning process that's kind of waterfall, a lot of high level requirements, documents, design documents, pre-plan out a big project. And then you do Scrum as a kind of approach to eat your way through that project timeline.
Like a way to manage the work that was predetermined.
Exactly. And then we just see how much of that we pull into this sprint. We plan it out. Maybe we allow some time in the sprint for run activities that are regular stuff that comes up, people's holidays, etc. But you're basically biting your way through the project backlog that you already pre-planned. And then depending on your release process, you may also have a waterfall release. You may be hopefully deploying regularly or on demand, but there can often be even a waterfall release approach to the actual project going out. And I think the problem with that approach is that when you do a project, when you do some work, you discover, I need to make another decision here as I encounter something. I learn something as I do the work. And what you discover is, oh, wow, there's this 5 more things I need to do, or this extra edge case that I need to take care of. And so as you do the project, your backlog of the project is expanding. It's not getting smaller, it's getting bigger. And there's all these new ideas that you have. And then you go down this rabbit hole and you build this extra thing, and your project exploded. And what happens is that business is saying, why is this taking so long? You're not delivering any results. And like we all get fixated on, oh, you know what? I learned all these new things and I can't release this now because it's not perfect anymore. And I have a fear based on, oh, I wish I could just polish this thing a bit more before I release it. we get dragged into all of these perfectionist tendencies as well.
Mm.
And then we try and do lots of crazy things in organizations. Like we have even more detailed estimation. Let's estimate out the whole project with story points. Do super advanced capacity planning for the quarter where you take all of your projects, highly detailed estimates. I keep getting challenged on why is that a large? So I need to go to a super detailed estimate to explain why this is large. I spend so much time planning and building the infrastructure around my delivery. And I'm actually spending less time on the value delivery part, the thing that makes a difference for the customer or for the business.
Yeah. Software development is a creative work by nature. If you want 100% precise estimates, you need to do the whole work. You need to face those hard problems. It's just absurd because you have a 6 weeks project and the first 4 weeks you estimate it, if you can fix into it or fit into it or not. That's a typical problem. And the solutions we come up with sometimes are also typical, like delay the project, delay the release, increase the headcount to try to fit into the deadline, all wrong solutions.
Yeah, add another person. This is like a super, I think I've got it right next to me on the shelf, but the mythical man month, let's throw some more people at it. It'll go faster. The reality is throw more people at it. They have to have more context. There's more communication needed in the project. We go slower.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And this is why I really prefer timeboxing as an approach, because it's based on this other idea from what's called a Parkinson's law, which is basically that work expands to fill the time allotted to it. And timeboxing inherently acknowledges that. And it works with the fact that that's what happens. So I think it's a way to reduce the amount of things that you have to do and get to more of an incremental shipping value and learning in smaller chunks in a lighter weight way, I would say. You can potentially, and maybe controversially, you could get rid of story points. You could, potentially, I think it's an enabler for Kanban potentially as well. You choose the method that works for you in the end. I don't really think it matters if it works for the team, but it definitely allows you to force yourself to get something out the door. And I think it's that's the main thing. It's a forcing function, a lighter weight forcing function to get stuff done.
Yeah, I would like to make this very explicit. Like you have these 3 variables, the time, the scope, and the resources, like how many people you have. And you make a very conscious decision that you're just going to put a pin on the time. Like that's going to be fixed. Everything else, resources don't change, I guess. So,
but you fix the people as well. I would definitely say you try and fix 2 variables out of the 3.
Okay, but this means that there is a lot of flexibility on the third because projects are changing. We have new information. So I guess this is what timeboxing is. Like, let's put aside resources now and consider fixed teams. Because a lot of organizations don't change teams around in a short term. You have 2 variables, the time and the scope, and you say, I'm going to fix the time and let's see what happens, right? So this is timeboxing essentially.
Exactly. That's exactly it. There's kind of like a couple rules related to this to make this work, which is that whatever time box you set, you need to ship something. You don't expand the time box. Like our initial feeling is always, I'm so close to this time box.
I just said one more day. Like I even saw people working on weekends just to finish the Friday stuff during the weekend because it's such a strong pressure.
Yeah, weeks are kind of an inherent time box that we've created as humans for ourselves. We don't always recognize that. And the day is a time box that, is a natural time box that nature imposes on us. The moments in between meals are time boxes that nature imposes on us. What I like about this rule is it's a forcing function for the conversation about what scope do we cut, and ideally as early as possible to still make the time box. So I think that's like the first rule.
Okay, question on this. Yeah, release something before the time box ends. That's the first rule. Why is there so much emphasis on release? Cannot we say that, okay, we are done with this task. This is ready for release, but maybe we have some regulatory reasons. Maybe there are training materials that needs to be done. Not every organization can just quickly release something to the wild. Maybe there are on-prem clients. And so why is this emphasis on release?
I think I'll answer this by giving you the second rule, of the time
Sorry
box.
for interrupting.
No, it's okay. Because, no, it's valid, right? So the second rule is you get to the end of the time box, and no matter what, you stop working and you review your progress, and you look back and you retrospect and you say, what did we learn? And the reality is that shipping can mean lots of different things depending on what you're doing. It could be that we put the doc out for a review. It could be that we have a prototype that we can do some user testing with. It could mean that we have it and it's not ready to be turned on under feature flag with users, but it's there. The really important part is you reflect at the end of the time box on what you learn. And then there's another part of it, which is you ask yourself, do we spend more time on this? Is this worth still spending more time on? And then you allocate another time box towards the activity if you feel like that is. Because the reality is that most projects require multiple time boxes to get the end result. But from an engineering perspective, I would say maybe there's a third rule I could add, which is no project time box should be bigger than 6 weeks, which means that...
That's more like a practical implementation thing, right?
Yeah, but I think a lot of projects like that we do, they take a quarter, really want people to work in smaller time boxes within that. Even though we'll say, yeah, we want to keep working on this, it makes us reflect back and say, well, okay, we're going to need to do another 6 weeks on this. What is the outcome that we want at the end of that 6 weeks? And rather than just running for 12 weeks for something and then thinking about it, it's really having that kind of like that reflective moment. And this goes back to the other part that I think on a high level part of time boxing, which is that when you use time boxes like this, instead of planning what are we going to do for the quarter and then doing this heavy capacity planning and saying, okay, I can do this Tetris of these projects and then this combination of projects so I can commit to these goals, you can say priority 1 is this, priority 2 is this, priority 3 is this. For priority 1, I'm going to spend 2 6-week time boxes on it with 2 people or 3 people of the team in it. Priority 2, I'm going to do a 6-week project with 2 other people. And priority 3, I'm going to do a spike of 2 weeks time box to learn something about it. And your planning becomes appetite and priority based upfront, and it's so much simpler because your scope is going to change and you have some ambitions and the goals and so on, but you don't have to do all this complex Tetris planning, which is all theater in a way anyway. It's all finger in the air stuff, right? You never really, no estimates are really, I think as an industry, we're moving away from estimates. So, yeah.
Okay. I really like 2 aspects of what you were saying. One is that to answer my question, why is there an emphasis on releasing something? And it really ties to the second rule about stopping when the time box ends and reviewing progress. And the key insight for me is that in order to efficiently review the progress and learn from what you did, you need outside feedback. You need to get something from the outside, from your users, your colleagues, your sales team, whatever. And this is why releasing something, getting something out of the scope of the team and to increase value of feedback. And the second thing I really liked is you were talking about outcomes. I think it's really, like I had an experience earlier when I was leading platform teams and we wanted to try cloud development tools, but we called the whole initiative improving the local developer experience. And one of the spikes was only to figure out if cloud development is mature enough for our goals. And it was really good because we found out that no, it's not. And actually the problems are in different areas in the development pipeline. And we could focus on that without having to change the project or go into a rabbit hole of implementing something that was not needed. So because the outcome was improving the local developer experience, we had the freedom to experiment with various stuff.
Exactly. And I think if we move on to like, what are the practical kind of ways to implement this? I think this is a really good segue into that because I would give some very high level guidance on this, which is if you have a project or an initiative, divide it into 6-week chunks, so maximum 6 weeks. Why 6 weeks? I think 6 weeks is just about long enough to really build something relatively significant and ship it. It's interesting
Mm-hmm.
because that kind of time box has emerged from multiple places. It's actually interesting because it's part of the shape up approach, where they work in these 6-week cycles and then a cool down. Shape up really focuses on the whole org working on a rhythm like that, and that can work. But there's other companies as well, I think, have blogged about this kind of 6-week time box. I can't remember. I think it might be Intercom and a couple others that have put it out there. It seems to have emerged as something that's reasonable. You can fit a few of those into a quarter and so on. So I think it works well as like your upper time bound for an increment of a project. It's kind of like turtles all the way down. It's kind of like a time box. We talked about setting an outcome for what am I trying to achieve? The guidance for what you should have as an outcome is a change in human behavior that impacts business results.
Unpack that a bit, because there are
Yeah.
I feel like this is those kind of sentences where every word has a reason to be there. So
Yeah, but
just briefly, it's a short rabbit hole, but I'm curious.
change in human behavior. So human behavior is measurable. It's something that you can measure. Users are able to do this thing or users do this thing, and you can measure it. Like it's ship a feature, but the feature is shipping to change a behavior or to enable a behavior. So you should be able to measure that at some point afterwards, right? Linking it to business results. So it has to have an impact, right? It's not just a random thing. Now, engineers can get really hung up on this, especially on technical things. But I think that human can be internal. It can be the CI going faster, giving feedback. It can be we spend less time investigating flaky tests.
Yeah.
You can measure that.
Yeah.
So, like I do think that this kind of outcome approach is really important. It's not ship a feature or ship this much of a feature. So I think it's important. Then the second part, breaking this down, is you don't just have the 6-week time box if that's your max or whatever. You need to chop that up into some time boxes. I like to say maximum 2 weeks and those are milestones, right? But ideally, if you can do 1 week, this outcome, and again, those are outcome, right? So that's why I say it's like
And shipping also. Like you want teams to ship something at the end of a milestone or so.
Yeah, do a demo. Ideally, you should be merging your code every day and it should be going into production, but maybe you're under a feature flag. With some of those milestones, we can actually turn something on for users, or we can enable it in beta, or we can do a user test with the mocks that we've done. But like those are all shipping that we can do. But yeah, those 1-2 week milestones are really important also. So you're not just doing the forcing function at the top, you're doing it all the way through. Because what happens is, if you don't do that, as you do work, there's this other really interesting thing that I need to do. And you get diverted and you do this really interesting, important thing, but you lose sight of the outcome I was trying to achieve, which didn't need this thing to happen. And I could have either stuck it in the backlog, I could document that we should really look at this or whatever. But like, if you can get from A to B, and maybe you have this conversation, the project, wow, I'm only going to be able to do happy path for the scope, right? That's a scope conversation. You're having a conversation about the scope, but you're obsessively focused on trying to hit the outcome of the milestone. So that's really important. I do think then the other practical guidance I'd give is the names of your milestones and your time box need to have clear kind of outcome-based naming. So they don't just call it like technical things or A, B, C, D or 1, 2, 3, 4, milestone 1, 2, 3 or whatever. No, make it meaningful for someone looking at your project plan to understand and like, what are you trying to achieve? And then this goes to the final part, I would say, which is create the visualization of your progress. And that means like showing like on a high level your project plan, the milestones, your progress. That can be Kanban, like a board that you have in the team and so on. But like visualizing the project, your projects together, the time boxes together. And then, as I said earlier, the really important thing in this is having a conversation when scope starts to creep, having de-scope aggressively, focus on the milestone that you're trying to achieve, put it into the next time box for the project as like, okay, this is the extra things we need to do. We got to the end of the time box of the project, 6 weeks. We realized actually we only were able to build happy path. We learned all these other things. we definitely need to be able to do a second time box of 2 weeks to make this something that can actually be turned on for users. Great. We learned a lot. And we still have an aggressive time box, which means that we need to get over perfectionism and the fear of shipping.
Yeah, I really like this. I feel like this technique addresses the inevitable, that scope is changing, things happen, there's an incident in the middle of your sprint that takes a week to resolve, all kind of things. And acknowledging that these diversions and unplanned things will happen,
Mhm.
it creates a recipe for how to handle those. And the recipe is, don't push the deadline, don't push the end of the time box out, because that's just going to have worse implications. Focus on descoping and releasing something and get those learnings, get those feedbacks, so your next time box can be more valuable and deliver results more aligned with business goals.
Exactly. And I think that the thing I would add to that is the other thing that comes up when you're working is new stuff, new project, new thing. And what timeboxing allows you to do is to say, we could do that when this time box ends in 2 weeks. Instead of pausing projects halfway and then coming back to them, you say, is it okay if we start that in 2 weeks? When this time box ends, we have a natural point that we've forced our project to end. And we can insert the new thing, and I feel like it's less disruptive because you took your project to a natural point that you aimed for from the beginning, rather than a pause at 80% done or 60% done and come back to it in 2 months.
Yeah.
So it allows you to do the reality of engineering is, I had to do this extra thing. Yeah. And like in your example where you have an incident that took a week out of the project, you have to just slip some of the outcomes that you're able to achieve. Oh, we didn't work on that milestone for a week because of this incident. We pushed stuff out. The time box achieved less, but okay,
I really like the aspect also that you mentioned with ShapeUp, that it creates a predictable rhythm that can be extended to other departments also. Like if marketing knows that there is this 6-week cycle, if sales knows, support knows, product management, very important. Like product managers can reliably expect that after the end of 6 weeks, I can rely on getting some kind of learnings that I can use in my next planning or next steps of coming up with features. Yeah, I like this predictable organization-wide rhythm that this creates.
Well, yeah, but what I'm not arguing for here, because ShapeUp has this kind of company rhythm, which is 6 weeks, 2 weeks cool down, and then you have like, what are the things that we work on in that 6-week time box? I'm not arguing for that, to be honest. I think one of the issues with ShapeUp that some companies have found is that engineering is too locked in that 6-week period, and we need other things to happen in a specific context of Basecamp, the company, and their product.
It's like the Spotify model, right? The old famous model, like that worked for them in those times.
I think the things that you need to learn from ShapeUp, extract the principles. This principle of maybe 6 weeks is a good upper time bound for your project. Like follow it also. I definitely don't force my teams to work in all 6 weeks. Some projects are 2 weeks with a 2-week time box. And it's more about a team might have 3 projects in flight or 2 projects in flight with different timelines. And they may have different periods of cooldown and so on in between. I think it's very hard to enforce like a whole engineering or whole company rhythm like that. If it works for you, it works for you.
Yeah, I guess it's a secondary benefit. Like if it works, great. It's a nice to have. Like, okay, I'm trying to be mindful of time. I have a quick question, and then we should move on to how this goes wrong and what are the pitfalls to avoid. So my question is that you seem to be downplaying the importance of estimations agreeably. Like we all know that they are never right. But in order to figure out what you can fit into a time box, you need some kind of estimations. You need some story points or t-shirt sizes or something. So how do you resolve this conflict of estimations? It's a waste of time. But on the other hand, I need to figure out what to fit into the time box.
I think it's much easier to say, these are my priorities, stack ranked. And I think it's much easier to say, priority number 1, in my opinion, I would spend this much time and this many people during that time box to work on it and to work with your planning on an appetite-based approach based on priorities and say, no, number 3, we need to do something on it. We can't just have number 1 take over everything, but I only want you to spend 2 weeks on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want you to do a
Mm-hmm.
spike and learn this thing. Maybe it's going to inform the next quarter, right?
Mm.
But we need to be able to have done that to go into the next quarter. If you're working in this way, you need to have some basics, like being able to ship really quickly. Timeboxing goes all the way down to the tasks that you plan, like planning tasks. Breaking down, you should be able to break down the tasks that you're going to do in the current week or whatever into a task that takes a day max. And basically you're decomposing your work. And ultimately this goes more to the kind of idea of counting the number of tickets to see your velocity. And you plan and break down your work into small enough. You break everything down into 1 story point size or whatever, like small size, whatever that is for you. And then you just count those. And in a way, you still can calculate your velocity or you can predict it. But the whole point of timeboxing is that you're more saying, okay, the first timebox in this, the first milestone timebox in this project of 6 weeks is we're going to have a kickoff. We're going to have a planning session together. We're going to align with the stakeholders. We're going to have a draft, a design document, and a PRD or whatever it is that you're going to do. And then in the second milestone, we're going to finalize that and finalize the plan. And we'll also have done these 2 spikes that we know we need to do. And actually, your milestones might evolve. You might have only planned the first 2 milestones of the 6 weeks. And then milestone 3 might be 2 weeks because you have to build this thing and Happy Path and your CI or whatever it is that you need to do. And then the final bit might be to just get to ship a final outcome of that, right? So the whole process is very different.
I like that. What I'm hearing also is that this process acknowledges the time needed to do proper estimations and actually puts it into the first phase of a time box. It's not expecting you to come up with estimations off the top of your head. It involves the whole team to do the spikes, as you said, do some design documents, planning, validating, and not focusing on this simple question of how long does it take to build a newsletter for my site.
Yeah, exactly. The whole planning process becomes so much easier.
Because every engineer has been there, I think, who was asked to make an estimation, that this very uncomfortable feeling that I'm just bullshitting here. Like, I have no idea to know exactly how long will it take because there are just so many unknowns, and it would be easier to just do the damn thing and measure how much time it took than trying to estimate it.
I mean, process is, we need to do quarterly planning right now, and we have these things that we could do. Let's really quickly estimate out the size of these different things that we need to do, which we know then the stakeholders are going to challenge in the planning quarterly planning meeting. And then we're going to do Tetris with those based on what we argue of the actual site, what we think, and the stakeholders. Now that's easy. Why is that so big? And so on. And then you have this kind of like back and forward, and you Tetris plan the quarter, and then you're locked in, and then you feel like you're failing the whole quarter because as you go, you've maybe done an upfront project plan already, but it's still
in your head, like it didn't meet reality. All right, let's talk about common pitfalls. Like, what are the risks with this process and how to avoid them?
Yeah, let's do this rapid fire. Time boxes being treated like a deadline and having kind of like a death march. Like you just mentioned it, people working earlier about weekends to meet the deadline for the Friday, what we said we would do on Friday or whatever. I think like the important part is having the conversation about the variable scope as early as possible and focusing on the outcome. So of course, time boxes are forcing function, right? And that's the whole point. Like there will be a sprint towards, like this afternoon, I'm just racing to get this thing so I can ship the demo. That's okay, actually. But if you're, and that's the whole point of the time box, but it can't be like that all the time. So that also comes from being super rigid rather than using your judgment, having conversations. Conversation is so important. I would argue that like at each milestone or like some kind of cadence in the team, as well as at the end of the project, you do retrospectives. And I would also say like that cooling off period in between, like like not putting enough slack and not having sometimes a buffer in between some of the bigger project time boxes that you're doing, I think is a problem. And like this takes time. You're not going to be landing this the first time you do it. It's probably going to feel a bit like a car crash until you've done like a few of these, and then you start to get into your rhythm. So it's kind of like it's like a steep learning curve to adapt to this. And frankly, the biggest learning curve isn't just the team; it's the leadership in letting go of this upfront planning, deep estimate conversation, and so on. Ultimately, I think for leadership, it is liberating because you're able to more easily adjust direction during the quarter because it's always leadership that is throwing stuff in. But it's hard. It's hard. And you slip back all the time.
It's interesting that you mentioned leadership. I had a talk with a CTO of a tech startup. I was considering consulting them. And the main problem they brought me was that in the last 2 years, we missed all of our deadlines, like no exceptions. And what can we do to meet those deadlines? And I was asking, what if the consequence is the opposite? Like, why don't you abandon deadlines? Why do you need internal deadlines? And the guy just didn't understand. I mean, probably I did a bad job explaining this concept, but it was weird to me that something is not working, but they keep on doing this, and beating themselves up that it's not working.
It's funny because in that scenario, I would say, what if you made your deadlines fixed capacity, fixed time, variable scope? Then you're actually introducing time boxes.
Plus, it's guaranteed that you're not going to miss the deadline because you didn't say what you're going to deliver.
But it's a forcing function because you will say, I want to achieve this by this date, and we'll cut some corners that we think we can do, and we try and ship something by then. If we retrospect and say, is that enough? Okay.
Yeah.
So
I really like also the emphasis you put on retrospecting and learning and improving. Maybe we should do a separate episode on just the retrospective itself now that we are called the retrospective, because I think there are a lot of pitfalls in that. There are a lot of teams that are just doing it because it's in the Scrum book, but they don't really get the value it could provide. So that's just an idea for a future episode.
Totally agree.
All right. I think we talked a bit about the bigger picture benefits, like the company-wide cadence, more predictability. What else comes to your mind, how this could be beneficial in the bigger picture for engineering teams?
So it simplifies planning, as we talked about, because you have prioritized topics and you're talking about applying your appetite for how much of my budget, how much of people's time are we going to spend on this? That's your budget and your appetite. I think it makes for a simpler way of working. It removes a lot of process in terms of potentially removing story points. I think it removes a lot of the kind of upfront planning, capacity planning, and so on. So it becomes an easier way of working for new people to join, and it's simplified, even if like the fact of having to discuss and change scope is actually going to be really hard for every new person coming in and they have to learn. But it's a different thing you have to learn rather than, like all the other stuff. What does 5 points mean here or whatever? I think this, and then the managing of stakeholders, the ability to adjust to changing stuff, and so on. And I think then the other bit that's interesting on this is technical debt, which is like this eternal problem that we have in engineering, can be time boxed as well. And that works really well with your stakeholders because you can say, I have this problem, I'm going to try and tackle it in 3 weeks this quarter, and it's fixed. And it's not like that technical debt project expanded and blew up and took up, you just realize we only shipped a part of it in the end and we need to maybe do some more. And so I think then it compounds because ultimately you should be able to ship more because you're being a bit more aggressive in descoping a bunch of stuff and realizing that's good enough for now. I need to go after this other thing. And so I'm hoping that organizations that adopt this feel they are able to deliver more business outcomes because they're kind of, okay, well, you know what? The business outcome was this, and you could do that if you had a 3-week time box or 3 months, maybe the 3 week can deliver just enough to make the impact, right? Obviously, there's questions about tech debt accumulation and so on, but I think it helps you ultimately push a bit more impactful change to customers.
I would even say more, it can be misleading. I would say the emphasis is on better, like more aligned with business goals. We all been there when we release a big half-year, 2-year project, whatever, and we just realized that users didn't need this. For a new company, for a small company, this can even mean the death of the company. This way of working with the shorter feedback loops and the quicker learnings allows you to really deliver the most impactful things.
Yeah, exactly.
What would be the 3 takeaways that listeners could take with them if they hear about timeboxing?
Yeah. So number one, I would say a time box is about focusing on an outcome. That's like a variable scope to enable that outcome. It's not just like a time limit for a fixed scope or whatever. It's a forcing function to make you focus on achieving that outcome regardless, and deeply prioritize as you do that to achieve the outcome. Number 2, I want to remind you about the 2 rules that I think are non-negotiable. Ship something at the end of the time box and do the retrospective. Say, what did we learn? Should we work more on this? Is this enough actually? Should we do something else that's higher priority? That's the discipline of making it. And if you're starting out, like number 3, if you're starting out, it might be a bit hard to just whole scale do this. So when you get to that tricky moment in the quarterly planning and there's a lot of things that you're trying to fit in, you could just say, hey, how about we just do a 2-week spike time box on this topic? We protect that and that's it, right? Just apply it a little bit somewhere and see if you can learn. And then if you can if that was working well, maybe you can apply it to a few more places. And if it's working well for you, maybe the next planning session or whatever, you propose more of a time box based approach.
Nice. So yeah, focus on outcomes, not deadlines. The 2 main rules: ship something before the time box ends and retrospect, and then start small and build a muscle. I really like this angle also that you mentioned at the end, some practical advices or thoughts about how to start, how to switch to this way of working. As a final thought, do you want to add something on that?
I think the way to get people on board is to explain the triangle of project management of scope and time and people or a resource or whatever, and put that on the table of like, okay, well, what are we talking about here? Remind them again about that project management triangle and use that to introduce the time box. I think that's how I would kind of frame it.
Yeah, and I would add one thing that if you feel discomfort, you should feel it. Like, this is how it works. It's going to be hard.
Yeah.
That's the whole point, of everything new that you're learning.
Yeah, because the discomfort means, okay, remind me, what's my focus? What's the outcome I'm trying to achieve? How do I aggressively prioritize? And by the way, when you aggressively prioritize, you take the pressure off yourself again. So yeah, it's a symptom that you need to prioritize. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy. This was super useful. I already know 3 people that I'm going to send this episode once it's live. And thanks for the listeners who are sticking with us. We're going to be back soon in another episode where I'm going to prepare a topic.
Yeah.
See you then.
It's great. And, there's all these algorithm stuff out there. Feel free to share or like and whatever the things that feed the algorithms. We really appreciate our small group of listeners that listen to us when we release an episode.
Exactly. Or just do what I'm going to do and send it to a friend or someone who you think it could be useful for.
Exactly. Cheers, folks.
All right. Bye-bye.